Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are here today. Talking about Genesis 32 and 33, but primarily what we are looking at, what this section is known for, is Jacob wrestling with God. And that is the thumbnail that we use for this video. It is the picture that is there on the screen. I'm going to make myself disappear so that picture is all the more clear. There's so much here for us to contemplate. There's so much here that we can learn, because there's all the things going on in the text and in this ongoing narrative with the life of Jacob and his dealings with Esau and Laban and Rachel and Leah and all his sons, all of that. But there is also this lesson that we can take that speaks directly to us if we allow it, this lesson about wrestling with God. It's not just some weird, quirky thing that happened here in the life of Jacob, and it's not some imaginary story that was made up for some reason. Jacob wrestled with God. God wrestled with Jacob. And we're going to dig into that. We're going to dissect it, take it apart, and see what we can make of that, see what it has to say to us. So let's pick up where we were. Jacob has left Laban. He's taken all his stuff. We're going to get a hint of how much stuff Jacob had as he comes time for him to meet Esau. And he's on the way. He's had that. And think of all these things. You know, in life, there are different stressors, right? And psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, they put these things on a scale of the things that are the biggest stressors, like losing a close relative, financial catastrophe, divorce, moving, a new job, losing your job, all these things that are different stressors in our lives. And if you look at Jacob's life from that perspective and set aside the fact that we can say he caused a lot of it, because, hey, guess what? In your life, the things that are stressors, very often, some of them at least, are things that you caused, that are at least in part on you for that. Okay? So let's keep that in mind. But there are all these things that have happened. Him having the stuff that went on before he left his father Isaac, the stuff with Esau and the deception that went on, and having to run away, his parents sending him away on that journey all by himself, and then being deceived by Laban, having to work all these years, having Laban switch his wages 10 times, all that stuff that he dealt with, and then trying to sneak away and Laban coming after him, and the potential for conflict and harm and damage there. And now that's where we are. We're moving forward, and on the map, I'll pull that up. He's traveled from all the way up here down, and where our text today is going to take place is way down here. So the text doesn't treat this like a travelogue and talk about, oh, it was a long, hard journey and it took a long time. And it just assumes that the audience to whom this text was written, because while the Bible, while the Old Testament, and get this, it's important, while it is written for you, right? The Holy Spirit intended it for us all. It wasn't written to you. Okay. Moses was moved to record this text, and it was written to the Israelites, the descendants of this very man whose name is going to be changed to Israel. It was written to them. And Moses didn't have to tell them that it was a long, arduous journey coming down from Padan Aram up north, all the way back down into Canaan and Peniel and those places that are going to be named. Just like I wouldn't have to tell you, my audience that's in the United States, that traveling from LA to Detroit is a really long trip if you're going by car. Don't have to tell you, you already know. So that part of it is skipped over because it's a given, but it also is part of the struggle that Jacob and his family, but primarily Jacob, is facing here. So let's jump into the text. So Jacob went on his way on from Laban, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means double camp. That term Mahanaim means double camp. And just a little bit of Hebrew for you here. Here's the word over here, and it goes from right to left. Okay. But this at the end, that little looks like a backward apostrophe, which is a yod. Yeah. And that's a mem. That's M. When that's at the end of a word, it means it's plural, or it can be, as in this case, double. So Mahanaim means double camp. But this is a part of this text that we can just blow right past because we're getting to Esau and that tension, that drama, and we're getting to Jacob wrestling with God. But look at what happens here. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Same term used for those entities that were going up and down on Jacob's ladder. It says they met him. What does that mean? Does it mean that he just saw them? Does it mean that he interacted with them? We're not told, but met seems to have that connotation. But he knew what was going on. He recognized them for what they were. And he said, "This is God's camp." That's pretty fascinating. That is a very overt, over the top, clear manifestation of God's protection, God's grace, his goodness, his providence, whatever label you want to put on it. There's a message here. God is saying, "I got you. Here are my angels, these divine entities, these spiritual entities. They're here. You're okay. I got you." That is the message that is here. And it's something that is often kind of missed because there's so much else that goes on. And there with that, just the reminder, pay attention to the text. Stop and think about what it's saying. Don't just let it race past you because you've got preconceived notions of what you're looking for in this section of the scriptures. God sent his angels to accompany Jacob to give him that reassurance that he needed. And God does the same thing for us. If we allow him, God gives us the reassurance that we need. Now, God has in many times, in many situations in my life, given me the reassurance that I need. I've never seen the angels of God come and camp outside my house. Not that that couldn't happen, but I've never seen the angels of God camping outside my house. But God comes to me through his word, and he gives me that very real assurance, the very message that I need at that time. And maybe it's simply reading a passage like this that reminds us all that God is watching out for us and that he will never leave us nor forsake us, as he was with our forefathers in the faith, so also he is with us. So that's just the start of this text. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, and he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." So we're going to keep popping back to the map here. He is at this point somewhere up here, and he's sent ahead, and we're going to have to back the map out here a little bit to be able to see all this. Edom is down here. This is where Esau has settled, down here south in Edom. See, up here's Hebron, Mamre, Jerusalem, Shechem. Esau had gone off down here, but Jacob sends messengers well in advance who riding camels, whatever, without the flocks, without the children, could travel much faster. Because let's face it, you've got all those animals, and he's going to refer to this later, and young children, whatever else. You can only move so many miles a day without putting stress and hardship on the livestock and on the young ones. He sends this message ahead. This is his big concern. If it weren't for Esau, he'd have no concerns about going home. Everybody else will be happy to see him. Esau wanted to kill him. That's why he went away. This guy, big, powerful, hairy, and red, wanted to kill him. Why? Because Jacob had done this along with his mother, had done this and deceived Isaac into giving him the birthright. Okay? All of this is coming into play. It's one thing to have your brother mad at you. It's another thing to have your brother mad at you if he's got the physique of Hulk Hogan or someone like that. That's what he's dealing with. And he has no reason to think that Esau, that his anger has lessened in the least. But what's he letting him know? I'm rich. I've got all this stuff. And we're going to see how that comes into play. But he's trying to pave the way. He's trying to make it known. I'm wealthy now. I wasn't on my own right, but I am wealthy. And make no mistake, when he comes back, when Isaac passes away, and we haven't gotten to that yet, everything Isaac had is going to Jacob. And that's part of the problem, right? Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is also coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Let's talk about that. 400 men. Why do you bring 400 men? Is that a welcoming party, or is it a war party? This term, 400 men, we've got so much to cover. I'm not going to jump to the places in the scripture where it's talked about, but 400 men was kind of a military cohort. When David was hiding from Saul, and it talks about the men who had come to him, guess how many they had? How many were there? 400. It's like a militia. It is a military force, and Esau is bringing them. And let's stop and think about this. And we're not told what Esau's intent is. I want to start with that. We're not told what Esau's intent is, but he's loaded for bear. He's bringing his forces with him. I think it's fair to conclude, we can't say it absolutely, but I think it's fair to assume that Esau didn't have good intent in coming to see his weaselly, conniving, tricky brother. So Jacob, and Jacob's response tells us something too. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he takes action. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. And he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company that is left will escape. He was preparing for the worst. He was preparing for the worst, that Esau was going to come and lay waste to him. And it was a reasonable assumption. But still, why is he going back? Who told him to go back? The Lord told him to go back. Who sent his camp to reassure him, just as he's moved beyond Laban and left all that behind? And literally, there was a line in the sand. There was those pillars that they put there, those monuments that said, I won't go back and forth. You won't come back and forth. When he parted with Laban, he can only move forward at this time. It's burning your bridges, so to speak. He burned the bridges back up in Padanaram. He wasn't going to be welcome there. He's got to go forward. And while he may, and see if this applies to you in your life, you get that reassurance from the Lord that you need. And then you walk out your door on whatever big day at work or with your company or with your family, whatever else. You walk out the proverbial door to face the day, and you don't have to go very far before all those questions, all those doubts, all those fears come upon you. And here he had good reason. His guys came back and said, your big, hairy, scary brother, he's coming and he's bringing 400 like-minded men with him. And what does Jacob do? Jacob does exactly what we need to do in these situations. And it might be physical illness that's facing us. Whatever the forces of harm that are arrayed against us, it might be financial collapse and catastrophe that faces us. But what does Jacob do? And I've said it, and I'll say it again. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're a lousy person. It doesn't mean you're a second-rate believer. Because here we've got Jacob. Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name is ready to be changed to Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. We've got Jacob, and he is terrified. Scared doesn't even do it. He's terrified. But what does he do? It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be terrified. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to have questions. Just know to whom it is you flee when you have those fears, doubts, and questions. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. He's remembering all the promises. Back to Genesis 12, I will be with you. Genesis 15, I will bless you and make you into a great nation. On and on we could go. God of my father Isaac, the one who was going to sacrifice Jacob, and the Lord came and stopped him and pointed to the lamb stuck in the bushes. Salvation, redemption, these are the things Jacob knew, but still he was afraid. So it's okay for you to be afraid. Just run to the Lord and pray to him when you are afraid. God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Yahweh, the Lord, Yahweh, he who causes to be, who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant, for I crossed this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Study this prayer. File it away. Look at what he does. He's afraid. He goes to Yahweh, he who causes to be, the God above all gods. and he reminds the Lord of his promises. Now, does Yahweh need to be reminded of his promises? No. Jacob needs to be reminded of those promises. And when we do that, we remember who we are. Oh Lord, I'm nothing. I'm not deserving of the least of all the mercies and all the truth which you have shown your servant. The humility of faith. The humility of faith. We cannot stand in the presence of our God. We cannot approach boldly the throne of grace, as we're told in the book of Hebrews, there to find grace and mercy in time of need. We cannot do that without understanding who we are, our own unworthiness, our own weakness, our own sin, that we are but dust that God has breathed life into. That's who I am. So when I approach him, I'm going to approach him in humility and in adoration, because he's also doing that too, isn't he? He is praising his God for who he is and all that he has done. And you know what happens when you recount God's blessings to you? And here's an exercise, this, along with studying this prayer and learning it and applying it to your own life. When you are struggling, and this is just a healthy thing to do on a fairly regular basis anyway, in your mind, in prayer to God, go through and thank him for all of his blessings to you. All of them. And you say, wow, that might take a while. Yeah, it might. It might, but we need to be living in this relationship that we have with him. It's not a peripheral thing that we fit in, that I got to find some time for that. That's not the way we go about this. It's not what he wants from us. He wants all of us. He wants all of me to be given to him. And so if I take that time and I thank him for all of the blessings in my life that he has manifested in my life, do you know what it's going to do? I'm going to, as I do that, I'm going to feel fear, trepidation, anxiety, uncertainty. It's going to melt away. It's going to become less and less and less. And I'm going to feel emboldened and comforted. And understand this. God rarely tells us how he's going to fix things. He doesn't. I don't need to know that. Humility of faith. Who am I? I just simply trust. He tells me to move and I go. Jacob was told to go back home and he goes. He doesn't know how this is going to be resolved. He has no idea, but he prays in humble confidence and thanksgiving to his God, Yahweh, who's going to take care of things. And that's all I have to know. Who am I to tell God he's got to give me the answers now? No, I don't want any uncertainty. Please, the answers, it's not like I'm talking to some hireling at work who's under me that I can tell, I need that report. I need it by Monday morning at 8 a.m. And if you're not here with that report, don't come. Do I talk to God that way? I shouldn't talk to an employee that way either. But you get the point. Who am I to tell him? No. He says, trust. He says, believe. He says, I've got you and you're okay. Back to the prayer. I crossed over with nothing, and now I come back and I'm 2 companies. And then he entreats him. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, and the mother with the children. Deliver me. Deliver me. He doesn't tell God how to do it. He simply asks God to do it, and he asks it with confidence. And again, reminding God, and God doesn't forget. He's reminding himself. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Study that prayer. learn it, it's powerful. It's powerful what we learn there about prayer. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau, his brother. Now, we're going to read through this list of animals that he sends, and we could talk about the relative value of the animals in their economy in that day. But it is a total, I'll just tell you that, and we'll go through it, 550 animals that he sends to Esau. And this is just a gift. So what does that tell us about all that Jacob had? He's sending this as a gift. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. That's impressive. That's impressive. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass over before me and put some distance between successive droves. And droves is a group of animals as you're driving them. Droves, cowboys out west back in the day. If you grew up watching all the shows in the 60s and so about cowboys, you'd know this, rawhide, etc. Cowboys were often called drovers. Drovers. They drove the animals. Put some distance between successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, when Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us. So he commanded the second and third and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. So he puts a plan in place. It doesn't say this is what the Lord told him to do, but after his prayer to the Lord, this is the plan he puts into operation. And it's a pretty good idea. I mean, these are expensive. And I don't think that we can very well quantify the value of these gifts in today's dollars. That's hard to do, but it was a whole lot of wealth. Any one of these groups would have made your average person vastly more wealthy than they had been before. These weren't minor gifts that he was sending ahead, but he does that. He sends them on, and then he's just left there in uncertainty. In human terms, uncertainty. He's put a plan into place. He prayed to God. He puts a plan into place, and then he's there. He's there by himself. And now we come to what is the heart of this text. And I'll pop this picture up here one more time. That's Jacob wrestling with God. And you can see God is much more physical than Jacob is. And here, there's so much that we could talk about here. I could literally take this section that we're covering and spend several weeks on it. There's so much here, but we've talked about it before. God often in the Old Testament manifests in human form, the angel of the Lord. And we understand, because of all kinds of different references and points of reference, that angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, is the pre-incarnate Jesus. And there is a difference. Here he is in human form, but it is distinct and different from when he is incarnate, conceived in the womb of the Virgin Mary. But this is God in human form. And that is an important concept to understand, a biblical reality set before us in the Old Testament, that it's just the way it is. It is inescapable that God would appear this way. He appeared to Abraham that way on his way down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham conversed with him. There are many other instances that we could use. Joshua in the commander of the Lord's army, again, the same physical presentation of Yahweh. And the Jews, the Israelites, knew about this. They understood it. They called it the two powers. The two powers in Yahweh is the way they understood it, and they wrote about it, and they talked about it. They decided to do away with that doctrine and pretend like the scriptures didn't present it that way after, guess what? Jesus came. And he throws it in their face at one point in time, which we're actually getting ready to cover in the Gospel of John. But it was because they wanted to do away with the possibility that Jesus could be God that they did away with the teaching of the two powers. But it has been, the scholars have shown that this is exactly the way they talked about it. That's the way the rabbis wrote about it. There are texts in Qumran, other places that made it clear this is the way they talked about it. Let's get to the wrestling. And maybe some of you out there, I know there's probably not a lot because it's a fairly small demographic of people who wrestled. If you wrestled in school back in the day, imagine wrestling with God. I mean, I wrestled some people back in the day who were impressive physical specimens. I can't imagine wrestling with God. And yes, they really wrestled. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them over the brook and sent over what he had. Sent the family across the Jabbok. Look at Jabbok. Look at Jacob. And then the word for wrestle is very similar to that word as well. They all kind of sound the same. The Holy Spirit will do this where he has these word plays. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I just wanted to point it out. Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him until the break of day. Now, when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip with this, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint. So he wrestled with him, and he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." So he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of that place Peniel. Pay attention. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. Okay, let's deal with this first of all, and we shouldn't shy away from saying these kind of things in a reverent way. This is weird. It's weird. Jacob wrestled with God. And why did he wrestle with God? Ultimately, what was it that he wanted? He wanted God's blessing. We should not be afraid of wrestling spiritually, wrestling with God, because what we see here is a physical manifestation, a real thing that occurred in this wrestling, and it teaches us an important lesson. It's okay to wrestle with God? Have you wrestled with God? And isn't it fitting that it's throughout the night? Oftentimes, when we wrestle with God, when we plead with Him, when we entreat Him, when we pursue Him in prayer, it's in the night. There is something about the dark hours of the night when you awake and you can't get back to sleep, and the things that are of concern to you, the things that weigh upon you, the things that overwhelm you, press against you in the night. Spiritually, they oppress you, and we pursue God. And sometimes it seems like He doesn't answer. Sometimes we pursue and we wrestle, and I like the term grapple. We grapple with God. We go back to His promises again and again, and we say, Lord, Yahweh, I don't see this playing out in my life. Why? And you notice it doesn't say they talked. They wrestled. Sometimes God allows us to wrestle with Him. And I know I've said this before, but I always think of wrestling with my children when I was much younger, and my beard looked like this and covered all my face. And I would wrestle with my children. And it wasn't much of a struggle for me to wrestle with my 4-year-old son or my 3-year-old daughter. They'd wrestle and they'd climb on me and they'd jump on me and they'd twist my arm and I'd pretend that it would hurt. And God allows us to wrestle with Him and pursue. And as here, He could have won. God could have done away with Jacob very easily in this contest, but He wanted Jacob to learn. Do not think when you are wrestling with God in prayer and going again and again to His word and His promises, which is a very healthy spiritual thing to do. When you are struggling, go to the promises of God. Go read the Beatitudes. Go read the 23rd Psalm, the 46th Psalm. We could go on and on and on. Go to those things again and again. But sometimes it doesn't seem, and the reality is that God isn't answering yet. Don't be angry with Him. And we want to wrestle with God. We don't want to whine and complain to God. There is a difference. If He allows you to struggle in silence for a while, to not respond, trust that He's teaching you something. And ask what that is. Have that enter into your prayer life, your conversation with Him. What is it you would have me learn? And He will, in His time, humility of faith, in His time, He will answer you. And you will learn. And you will be blessed. But we don't get to set the agenda. We don't get to write the narrative. All we do is, just as Jacob did, persist, pursue, and trust. And in the end, what happens here? God blesses him. God blesses him. He changes his name. That's a big thing if God changes your name. And Jacob, the supplanter, the tricky one, it wasn't much of a name. It wasn't much of a name. He changes it to Israel, which has to do with wrestling with God. He blesses him and reassures him of all the promises. Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. And it literally means prince with God, right? You have struggled with God and men and have prevailed. Bottom line, in the end, Jacob prevailed. He didn't prevail because of his own doing. in his own cleverness. He prevailed because God blessed him. He prevailed in his wrestlings with Laban because God told him how to come out on top. He's going to prevail in his meeting again with Esau because God is going to bless that. God is going to use those gifts that Jacob sent to soften Esau's very callous and hard heart. And he asked God's name, and God doesn't tell him. He said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" And he blessed him there. Point being, you know who I am. You know who I am. I don't need to tell you my name. How do we know this is God? Well, up here it says you've struggled with God and with men. But what does he do? Oftentimes we identify the angel of the Lord, that it is indeed God, by what he does. By what he does. And what does God do? What does this angel, this man, this messenger, what does he do? He blesses Jacob. Who can bless? Who can bless? Only God can bless. He has the power to do that. So we can tell by what he does. And then Jacob's response, and it's overwhelming here. There are these different ways we can look at it that makes it clear that this is Yahweh. This is God. It's the angel of the Lord that he wrestled with. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. And you see L here, L-E-L, that's God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And Peniel literally means face of God. Jacob knew who it was. He names the place accordingly. Just as he crossed over Penuel, because it was kind of called both mean the same thing, the sun rose on him and he limped on his hip. Sometimes in our wrestlings, our spiritual wrestlings with God, we come out with a reminder. We come out with a reminder. I have an ankle and a knee from my days when I was young, dumb, and doing athletics that when the weather is just right, remind me of lessons I learned long ago. Jacob is going to limp for the rest of his life. And he could look at that as, wow, why did God do that? Or you can look at that as, oh, that's a reminder to me of this encounter, and it helps me remember important things. And as a result, the Israelites did not eat that part of an animal that they're connected to the hip. Well, I had every intention of going on into the meeting of Jacob and Esau, but we're not going to get there because time has gone too fast. So we'll just wrap things up with Jacob wrestling with God. There is, as I have said, so much that's here that we can apply to our own lives. And there's comfort just in knowing we're not alone. We're not alone. We make a mistake, even with someone like Jacob, with whom we see in the scriptures so many shortcomings, so many mistakes, so many things that he did that he shouldn't have done that resulted in him being in trouble. And that's an important lesson as well. We could trace back the narrative of his life back to before the incidents with tricking his brother out of his birthright, all the way back to that, and all of those different things that could happen. We could say that the causation of that was Jacob's own doing, or his participating in his mother's idea about tricking Isaac. Rebecca talked to me. We could point all that out. It was mostly his own doing. God took care of him anyway. That doesn't excuse sin. It just reminds us that God's grace is bigger than our shortcomings and our mistakes. And the other thing we see is, guess what? How long has it been? It's been 20 years. And Jacob is still terrified of having to meet his brother again. He's carried that with him all this time. All of these different things compounded, right? Having to deal with Laban and his trickery. Why? Because he had to leave home to go back there and stay there. He couldn't just go get a wife. He had to stay there. All these things were his own fault, but God helped him anyway. God doesn't look at you and say, hey, guess what? You blew it. You made this mess. You deal with it. You clean it up. He doesn't do that. He helps us. But still, the fact that our sinful actions and bad choices that we make, it has real ramifications in our lives. There are consequences of that with which we have to deal. We have to live with those things. God will help us with it. And because His grace is bigger than our sin, He turns hardship into blessing, but we still go through the hardship. Wonderful section here in chapter 32. There's so much that applies directly to our lives. So I encourage you, go look at that prayer that Jacob prays, file it away, learn from it, learn how to look at your own relationship with God, and do not be afraid to wrestle with God, with the different things in your life. Allow Him to engage with you and teach you and bless you. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.